Unmasking the African truth, the African way, and retracing the steps of gallant African Indigenous spiritual heroes and heroines, we speak without favor and we leave no stone unturned. AHV, 100% Indigenous African content.
Welcome to our exciting episode of the African Hidden Voices podcast. Today, we are honored to host our Honorable Vuyolwethu Zungula, the President of the African Transformation Movement. Our podcast serves as a critical platform for engaging with the political, intellectual, and spiritual dimensions of the African experience. We explore issues that shape the continent's identity, reclaim its narrative, and amplify its hidden voices. In this episode, we engage in a thought-provoking dialogue under the theme Eurocentric versus Afrocentric Leadership, reclaiming Africa's political identity, a critical dialogue on leadership paradigms and African future. Today, with Honorable Zungula, our President, we will unpack the ideological and spiritual foundations of the leadership of the African continent, question inherited governance models, and explore how Afrocentric frameworks can guide Africa towards authentic, sovereign leadership rooted in the indigenous values of Africa. Our knowers, your host is Usemulanga, as you know, the analyst. Do not forget to subscribe, like, and share our podcast. And also, please support this a newly book that has been launched by the African Hidden Voices called Restoring Africa's Spiritual Identity. In brief, who is Honorable Vuyolwethu Zungula? He is the member of the South African Parliament since 2019, the founding president of the African Transformation Movement, an advocate for integrity, justice, and ethical leadership in politics. His education and background, born in Msobomvu in Eastern Cape, holds a BCom in Business Management and Accounting, holds a degree from UNISA, Masters in Development Policy from the University of Cape Town. He co-founded a student bursary funding, helping plus 100 students. His political insights, he initiated the Section 89 inquiry into President Ramaphosa's Phala scandal, played a major role in pushing for parliamentary accountability. He was appointed as Secretary General of the Africa Young Parliaments Network in 2024. And nonetheless, he's the champion of the poor and the voiceless. He believes in conservative African values and ethical leadership, pushes for educational transformation and youth development, calls for the return to principled, issue-based politics. Honorable Zungula, welcome.
Thank you so much. It is truly an honor and a privilege to be part of the podcast.
Thank you, Mr. President. So briefly tell us about your upbringing and briefly explain what had led for you to dwell in matters of politics.
Fortunately, I grew up with my grandparents. Firstly, as Lalini, then we went to the township. And you know, when you grow with your grandparents, yes. There are some values that you learn because abazukulwana firstly baninzi. Unlike a case where you grow only with your parents, it's only yourself and your brother or yourself or your sister, then you get to be selfish, self-centered because nibabino or there's three of you. Yes. But when you grow in a household whereby at any given time there's at least 10 children, yes. You can't have that greed. You can't be selfish because the situation forces you or teaches you to be more in tune with, sharing because niba needs. And, when I went to varsity, I was not active in politics, okay. in the sense of being in a political party. Yes. But, politics is not being in a political party. Everything that we do as citizens is political because if we are going to want to buy bread, yes. The exercise of going to work because you want to have any form of income so that you are able to buy bread, buy clothes, and buy a house. It is a political exercise.
Yes.
If you are going to be talking about into zasekuhlaleni, if you are going to be talking about izinto zasemakhaya, that is politics. But so the situation forced me in 2018 to be formally part of a political party. When the ATM was formed. It was formed by the coming together of predominantly African Indigenous churches who are not part of the South African Council of Churches, because the view was that these churches are sidelined in the governance issues. However, when we started speaking about the party, Amakosi came to the front and said, we do not want another party that will focus on into zenkolo. We want a party that will represent all of us, especially in the context of ukubuyiswa kwesidima somuntu omnyama and nokuphakamiswa kwamasiko ethu. Be inclusive. So that is what ATM is all about.
Okay. So now, dwelling on our discussion today, since we are unpacking the Eurocentric versus the Afrocentric leadership, our first question can be, how do you believe that Eurocentric leadership principles have eroded African spiritual and communal leadership in post-apartheid South Africa?
I think, when we answer that question, we just need to make the viewers understand that the nature and character of Eurocentric leadership, it is dominant. Eurocentric leadership is more of dominating, more of uprooting. It's more of individualism point of view. It is not communal. It is not looking at the broader communal goals. And when we are saying that it is uprooting, Eurocentric leadership, if you look at how it came about in our continent, you'd find that a person unegama ekuthiwa Vuyolwethu, and the people that are colonizing bangakwazi uyipronounce. But you know what, we are going to call you Joy, for example, meaning they uproot you from who you are. So that's why some of these surnames that we find in our country, they come as a result of Africans being uprooted and given new identities and names to suit the oppressor and not, fully express themselves. Because if the oppressors could not pronounce Mtimkulu, they would say Unguhrutbom, into ezinjalo. So that is the nature of Eurocentric leadership. It uproots people from what they are.
Their nature of being.
Their nature of being, and it dominates. That is why when they come to an area, they will not want to coexist. Even though they came here in 1652, but they started getting more land. And when they move from the Southern Cape, entering to, towards the Eastern Cape or towards North, they do not just come in and settle. Their form of leadership means uprooting people from their land, forcing people away from where they are. But when it comes to Afrocentric leadership, one would look at the cases of, there were times where there were wars in the current KwaZulu-Natal, and there were people that ran away to settle in the Eastern Cape. When they got to settle in the Eastern Cape, they were given land. And even Ikumkani that had land in the Eastern Cape did not want to subjugate to those people to say, nizoba ngaphansi bakwaXhosa. Rather, they said, look, sizonikeza umhlaba endaweni ethile. Inkosi zenu will continue being inkosi zenu, meaning they do not uproot abantu from inkosi zabo, because that is not the culture and the norms of Afrocentric leadership. Afrocentric leadership, it is inclusive and it appreciates who you are instead of undermining who you are.
It enhances your identity.
Exactly.
Okay. So now, Honorable, there's a statement that was written in a paper by Busak in 2015. I think it is interesting that we explore a thematic analysis and an approach of other African scholarship that were actually able to discuss matters of Afrocentric leadership against the Eurocentric leadership. So now, this statement, I quote, states that Afrocentric leadership models are historically rooted in Christian theological constructs such as the divine right of kings, which reinforced hierarchical authority and justified centralized power as ordained by God. These religious roots evolved into modern secular governance while maintaining the same top-down structure. And as we know that we believe in the bottom-up structure. So now the question is, given that Eurocentric leadership originates from religious construct that sanctify hierarchy and control, do you believe these inherited frameworks are compatible with Afrocentric leadership?
Not at all.
Yes.
There's no way Eurocentric leadership. In fact, ever since the continent or the southern part of the continent was colonized,
Yes.
no one can confidently say that Eurocentric leadership and its constructs can work in the African context. You check, for example, now what is happening in Niger, in Mali,
Yes.
and in Burkina Faso.
Yes.
Captain Traore there is not confining himself to the Eurocentric leadership. He's leading the country, which is Burkina Faso, using the Afrocentric leadership, simply because the other president that came after they killed President Sankara,
Yes.
it has been evident that they can never fully liberate or transform Burkina Faso.
Yes,
So these Eurocentric and Afrocentric leadership can never be compatible because the view and the perspectives and the worldview of such different types of leadership can never meet or can never find themselves working for the betterment of society.
So now that you spoke about President Traore, it's good to learn from his political leadership as he integrated actually the indigenous frameworks in leading. This is why he was able to uproot the Eurocentric leadership in Burkina Faso. Do you think that some of the African countries and also its leaders can take Burkina Faso as a case study to restructure their constituency?
You know, in my mind, I want to believe that all presidents in Africa,
Yes.
they know the type of leadership that is needed, and they know how Captain Traore is on the right path.
Yes.
However, because of their colonial ties with the former colonizers, whether it's the British, it's the French, it's the Portuguese, they are unable to break free from the clutches of being colonized. That's why you find that in some of the countries, you find that there's going to be the French army being settled in those countries.
Yes.
You find that some of the departments, the politician could be, yes, a citizen of that particular country, but the officials that are running the show behind the scenes, it is still French citizens. Just like in our case in South Africa, whereby some of the institutions that actually micromanage, if it's not the World Bank or the IMF.
Yes.
So I want to believe that these presidents, they know, but because they have been entangled and they've been made to be puppets of the system of the West,
Yes.
they will never openly support Captain Traore. But deep down, I think they know.
They know, yes.
They know, but if again they were abantu abanyanisekileyo and given and driven by a higher calling of African spirituality,
Yes.
you know, it takes one man to be brave to say, you know what, I'm not going to continue on this path. Because if you look at what Thomas Sankara did,
Yes.
he was brave to break, free from the French. And the other president that followed after him took back Burkina Faso to the French. But to Captain Traore, what is done is that he broke free. If you check the entire region,
Yes.
the entire region, most of these presidents, you may have elections, but if the attitude and the mindset of these presidents is still an attitude of abantu who are loyal to the colonizers,
Yes,
we
yes.
can never break free. So it takes a high level of bravery, but I don't think you can be brave if you do not have, if you are not driven by spirituality, because uzokoyika, because of what the outside world will tell you about, okay, fear this, do not fear this. And obviously the colonizers will tell you, Kuba, if you do this, this is how we're going to punish you.
Yes.
But once you are driven by spirituality, then you know, Kuba, there is nothing that can stand between you and what abakowenu and nomdali is pushing you to do.
Yeah. Now, rumor has it that behind Traore, there are spiritual guiders. So now, according to you, what is the significance of spiritual guidance towards politics and Afrocentric leadership? And again, let's define for our knowers what spirituality is, because of now we keep on talking about spirituality this, spirituality that, but in simple terms, what is spirituality and what is the significance of these spiritual guiders in forming Traore to partake into this particular journey and style of leadership?
No, if you talk about spirituality, let me start there. Spirituality, firstly, it is indlela yokuzazi wena,
Yes.
know who you are, and connect nabantu bakowenu, and connect nomdali ngaphakathi kwakho, even before you may want to connect with another person.
Yes.
Now, spirituality then informs your ethics and your moral underpinnings, your ethical groundings.
Yes, yes.
That informs how you behave, how you do things, and how you view leadership.
Yes.
Now, the reason why it becomes important for, firstly, any leader, any political leader, to be a leader that is spiritual or spiritually grounded, it is because as a leader, you don't lead yourself.
Exactly.
You are leading people.
The people, yes.
Now, you can't be able to lead abantu even, whereas when yourself, you are not led by a higher power.
Yes.
So you need to be led by yourself by a higher power. That's the first thing. Now, the importance of having spiritual guidance as a leader of a country now,
Yes.
it is because when you take decisions, you know, it's very funny because some of these presidents have got economic advisors.
Yes, yes.
They've got legal advisors
Behind
behind
them,
them,
yes.
because they know that some of the decisions they take, they need people who specialize in law.
Exactly. In
Some
order-
of the
yes, yes.
decisions they take, they need people, they need to be advised by people who specialize in the economy, so that they are able to take decisions
That are informed.
and that will not damage or ruin the economy or destroy the economy. But they refuse to understand that a human being is a spiritual being. That is a point of departure. Now, you cannot be leading spiritual beings as a leader without yourself, firstly, being spiritual, secondly, being guided spiritual. So that is why I think, in my view, the Captain Traore is on the right path and is doing wonders in Burkina Faso. It is because I view him as someone who's spiritual, and like you said, he's got the spiritual guiders.
Yes, the backing,
the
yes.
backing. So that is the balance that you need, because you know when you lead, let's say I can make an example of a person driving a bus.
Yes.
If you are driving a bus as you are like a leader,
Yes, yes.
because you've got 65 people, 65 souls under your care, under your leadership. Should it happen that you don't drive well, you're not only going to impact yourself, but you're going to impact the 65 people
Yes.
in your bus. Now, if you are a leader or a driver that is spiritually driven and spiritually guided, you will be told that, okay, slow down, because behind that curve, there's an accident, or there's something that can cause an accident. Now, spirituality is more about being in a space whereby uzotyhilelwa ngezinto ezingekenzeki that have got the potential of harming not only yourself, but the people under your care. Now, if you are spiritually guided, then you'll be able to lead the country, lead the people with the hindsight or the benefit yokutyhilelwa okanye yokuxelelwa ngabantu abatyhilelwayo ukuba slow down, take this decision, because bayakwazi ubona izinto zingekenzeki. Whereas the other advisors, they can only respond to issues. You know, they will never be able to tell you into ingekenzeki. They'll never be able to tell you kuba, if you take this decision, this is what will happen.
Okay. Yeah, just to elaborate on that, we have seen that the Islam religion, or better, the nation or community, have done so well in terms of making sure that everything they follow in terms of politics, academia, health, they make sure that they follow their principles that originate from the Sharia law. And we have seen that they make sure that they create associations to better represent what they stand for. So according to you, do you think that it is best that here in South Africa or in Africa at large, we initiate an association that will better represent Africans with their spirituality. Because of, if you look into matters of associations, there has not been an association that can better represent African spirituality per se, so that we know that our spirituality is well represented. And given that you have a master's in policy, what's your take on that? And how can we better shape policies that can actually advocate for our spirituality?
You know, if you go to China, the Chinese use their own indigenous system as a way of life. That is why Chinese, you know, there's a time whereby there was over 50 million 50 million Chinese that were living in poverty. But under 30 years, they were able to uproot those people from poverty. That is why China became, it's a leading country economically now in the world. Similarly, if you go to the Middle East, the countries there, they've stayed true and rooted on their own principles and their way of life. Now, the issue that we have with Africa is that you've got Africa that does not want to play according to its strengths. It is wanting to play according to the strengths of the people that colonize them. Exactly. If I can make just a small example, and I hope people get it. You know, the reason why maybe South Africa won the AFCON Cup in 1996, because the style of football was suited to us as abantu abamnyama. It was something that was it was defining to the character, to the skills and the capabilities. And then after they tried to introduce South Africa to play a European type of football. Whereas if you go to Brazil, they play football according to their terms. If you go to, that is why they'll always succeed, because nature allows them. The reason why, Tina, as Africans, we are in these challenges, because we want to operate not according to nature, meaning ngalendlela sidalwe ngayo, but want to operate ngendlela yabantu abavela ngaphandle. That is why economically, socially, even spiritually, siyile siyo as a continent.
Yeah, just to pick your brains. There's a spiritual guide, Dr. Imboni Uzilezo. He once stated that umuntu omnyama uyafana nehashi. Ihashi linamandla but alwazi amandla wawo. So I'm commenting based on what you have just said right now, that Africans bane potential but they can't utilize their power to its fullest. And again, to back up this statement, we have a doctor in the United States, Dr. Robertson, who actually done an extensive research in matters of DNA, who actually mentioned that if Africans and Black Americans can realize their authentic original history, they will reach their fullest potential. So, ihambisana nalento we mentioned that it is critically important that Africans realize their potential. And it's through knowing who we are and what we stand for us to compete with other nations and races. So now, going back to our question, we have the likes of Umbiki, another scholar as well, who wrote a paper on the spirit of African leadership. He states that, I quote, Afrocentric leadership is rooted in Ubuntu philosophies, where leadership is not about command, but about fostering unity, dignity, and shared responsibility. Now, the question says, Honorable Zungula, that how do you personally incorporate Ubuntu in your leadership style, and how does it shape your potential vision for South Africa?
You know, the principle of Ubuntu says, umntu ngumntu ngabantu.
Yes.
Now, I think if we can maybe use the very same principle in terms of leadership, you are nothing as a leader without the people. Because it is the people that recognize you as a leader. Therefore, there can never be a time where you get that wrong. Immediately you get that principle wrong, that as a leader, yours it is to do what is right by the people. And again, sometimes we make a mistake in our country when it comes to the question of leadership. We think leadership is a case whereby you've got one person that is so superior intellectually that, they are going to be this wise and brilliant leader. Whereas as a leader, you need to understand that you can never beat the collective wisdom of the people that you lead. So the first duty that you have as a leader, it is to subject yourself to the wisdom of the people that you lead. When they come to you with whatever advices, so yours is to udibanisa their advices, their views, uthi alright njengoba sithetha sisonke siyi-20 sithetha lento uyidibanise uyihlanganise as a leader uphume nelizwe elinye. So that is my understanding of what leadership is, especially in the context of you are nothing as a leader without the people you lead.
Yes, and now this gives us a sentiment that this is the best approach for Afrocentric leadership, where it's a bottom-up system.
Yeah. That is so much true, because I think maybe it was deliberate.
Yes.
Because if you check even democracy, there was a period whereby it was the people that were leaders. Go to any community, the leadership was there. But you find that politically, they started to create what is called messiahs. For example, they built an image of Utatu Mandela to say he's going to be our symbol of a resistance. Now, South Africa then, the type of or the attitude or perspective of leadership changed. It was not a bottom-up type of a leadership, but it was a top-down because they were trying to have these messiahs, or these symbols of leadership. You have Tatu Hanu, Tatu OR Tambo, Tatu Mandela. So that, even though it is good, because sometimes it's good to have a reference point, but it must not come at the expense of destroying the moral and leadership fabric of the entire society. So instead of having a reference point, but also keeping this widespread leadership in our communities, what people did is that they took all of their leadership capabilities and their leadership insight and said, you know what, Tina sizomamela uTatu Mandela, without even themselves saying, okay, how do they interrogate that even when uTatu Mandela is leading, they need to guide him because he's a human being at the end of the day. So I think that is what South Africa got wrong in terms of destroying the structure of leadership, because its structure of leadership, once it's top down, it becomes problematic because the person at the top can be bought because he's an individual. But if it's bottom up, then it means if you want to destroy the entire society, you need to destroy the entire millions of people. So that is what I think maybe could be corrected.
Okay. Yeah, now that we're talking about South African politics and its icons such as Babu Mandela. Yeah, tell me, Honorable, we have done an extensive data with regards to the voter support, and we have discovered through data insights that the African National Congress, ANC, so to speak, started losing voter support from 2019. And ever since then, it kept on slowing down in terms of the growth of the voter support. And political parties such as yourselves were able to gain voter support with regards to the loss of ANC, so much that it led to ANC to initiate the government of national unity. But now we see that this collective approach had led to the same government that advocated for 100% African in governance and parliament. But we see that white people are coming back slowly again into parliament and into governance. So what do you think, what has led, so to say, to the declining of voter support with regards to ANC, and how can we better shape the future governance of South Africa, knowing that African political parties are able to collaborate under one vision to restore Africans and also its dignity and pride in terms of leading the country into a better direction and future?
You know, the struggle has always been about the people.
Yes.
People can say it's the ANC that brought about democracy.
Yes.
I beg to differ. It's the people that brought democracy. It is the people that protested. It is the people when they wanted boycotts who are leading boycotts. In other words, it is the people that made it unprofitable for the apartheid government to lead. Yes. Now, after 1994, or just before 1994, the colonizers and the oppressors were very smart because they started now to co-opt some of the leaders of the ANC.
Yes.
That is why when you go to the CODESA negotiations, the people that were busy leading those negotiations there, immediately after 1994 negotiations, etc., within 4 or 5 years, they became millionaires, they became billionaires. People, they've never invented anything, they never ran a company. It is because they were co-opted. Even now, if you're to go to Parliament, there is a members' disclosure whereby you can get to see the leaders, in fact, all 400 members of Parliament, including the ministers. You then get to see which member of parliament or minister owns shares in what mine, in what bank, etc. You'll find that majority of the leaders of the ANC, they're owning shares in the mines, in the banks, and some of the big companies. Now, that is what has made the ANC to be distanced from the electorate, because the struggle of the people, they want transformation, they want to correct the wrongs of the past in terms of the training of the land. They want to transform this racial society that we have. Now, because these guys are now co-opted, they do not take decisions for the betterment of the people. They take decisions for their own personal benefit. I want to make an example. There is no one who can doubt that we need a state bank in our country. A bank that will be competitive, yes, but understand the dynamic of the financial situation of the people in this country. But we can never have a state bank because majority of the NEC members of the ANC, of the ministers, are owning shares in the banks. And they'll never take a decision that will make them have less money, because if there's a state bank, let's make an example. Currently, you have NEFSAs that wanted to distribute funds to the students, via these private banks. You had cases whereby we've got over 20 million people that are using ISASA grants, and each and every transaction there whereby the state is paying let's say me as a SASA beneficiary, there is a transaction fee that is paid to the bank, which is an intermediary. Now, if you were to say as a country, why don't we remove this intermediary? Have all of the South African citizens who want to be grant recipients to have a card of the state bank. That way, you keep money circulating within the state, because instead of paying bank charges to a private bank, you pay bank charges to your own bank as a state. But they'll never do that because they are co-opted. So that is why the decisions they take, they are not taking decisions informed by the struggle of the people. They take decisions informed by their own material benefit, because they are now owners of the very same companies that we have in our country.
So now, are we saying that they are approaching their leadership in a stakeholder capitalism approach, where stakeholders are the ones who benefit more than the people on the ground?
Yeah, they're definitely approaching leadership in a capitalist point of view, because a capital, you can say, is a person that truly espouses the principles of Eurocentric leadership, because they think about themselves. They do not think about the benefit or the well-being of the common good. So they only think about themselves, whereas Afrocentric leadership means at times you need to sacrifice. You know, when we're talking now about this, the question of uniting parties so that we work together. Because at the bottom line here is that the system that oppresses us as the people does not care whether a person is umupedi, ungumzulu, ungumxhosa, ulimpondomise. It oppresses us ngondlela efanayo.
Yes.
It does not care whether you are EFF, you are MK, you are PAC, you are ATM, you are ZAPO. It oppresses you the same way. It does not care whether you go to Ezion, Nazareth, Postile, Olisosha. It oppresses us the very same way.
Exactly.
Now, that is why we need to unite.
Yes.
Because we need to transform the system. But because we have been so mentally colonized, that's why Steve Biko said the most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor, it is the mind of the oppressed. Immediately, usiya kumuntu omnyama uthi masihlangane. The first question is that sohlangana under bani? Because akho muntu ozothi no masihlangane under so and so, because akho muntu ofuna uthobela omnye. They do not even want to think ba xa sinohlangana, we would remove our problems. They do not even want to think that. And when I say it's so discouraging, because the Boers and the British, if you check their war, the Anglo-Boer War, they fought, and so many British and the Boers died in that Anglo-Boer War. And the Boers and the British found themselves saying, you know what, this war between us as the invaders, as the colonizers, is not taking us anywhere. Let us unite. And unity yabo was for the oppression of abantu abamnyama. If you read up on the history of the Union buildings, it has got two sides. There's the East and the West. It symbolizes that unity between the British and the Boers, because they knew that without them uniting, they will never be able to enjoy what they are enjoying in our country. But thina bantu abamnyama, who've been at the receiving end of the brutality of the invaders since 1652, we still find it difficult to unite, because umuntu uzothi no mna ndingumXhosa andizuyunita nomZulu, athi omnye no mna I am MK andizuyunita nomnye umuntu, omnye umuntu athi I am PAC, I'm EFF, I'm not going to unite with ATM. But at the end of the day, if we truly and we are genuinely for the transformation of our country, the unity of abantu abamnyama is non-negotiable. So, to conclude your question, now Afrocentric leadership forces us to say what is in the best interest of the people. Because I need into for me to say, but I'm a president of a party, I want to be because what does it help for me to be president? Whereas abantu that I claim to serve, abantu that I claim to love, my presidency does not improve their lives. If we as the leaders, whether in the spiritual circles, the religious circles, the royal leadership, in the political parties, in the communities, can come to a realization ukuba ukuma kwethu holding on to our leadership positions, it does nothing towards the greater good of freeing abantu abamnyama. So we just need to find ourselves, ukuba, let us find each other, unite, so that even our grandchildren can say that the generation of abatata, abamama, and these people truly transformed the country for and the continent for the betterment of all.
Yeah, I like your approach in that. And one of the statements from Dr. Khatebe, he always likes to mention in his organizations, speeches, he always states that politics, religion divides, but the only glue that can unite Africans and the world is spirituality. Because of spirituality looks beyond the scope of tribalism. It looks beyond the scopes of politics, political differences, and our personal differences as communities and societies in Africa. And he also states that African solutions for African problems. So with that being said, do you think are we doing enough as African leaders to better approach the unification of Africa through spirituality?
I think we are on the right path. You know, there's that saying, Rome was not built in a day.
In a day, yes.
Yeah, but it takes a resilience. It takes people pushing as much as possible.
Yes.
It takes going on social media, speaking about this, going to churches, speaking about this. Even if you go to a bar or tavern, as long as kukho abantu, let's speak about spirituality.
Yes.
Because you know the importance of spirituality. Mhlambi if ndingayibeka ngesixhosa, spirituality senza ukuba ube nonembeza ube
Yes,
ngumntu.
yes, conscience.
I-conscience, because xa uwedwa, when you are alone, I can't see you when you are doing something wrong.
Yes.
But if you are spiritually grounded and you are a spiritual being,
Yes.
there's going to be a voice in you elizothi
Lizokhuluma nawe.
lizokhuluma nawe lithi kwenziwa kanje.
Yes.
Now can you imagine if we're a type of leaders who, even if they are alone, but there's a voice in them that guides their actions and their moral behavior. Unlike what we see now, whereby leaders, they act as if their wrong actions will never be seen. So the importance of spirituality is very critical in terms of making abantu being rooted in a behavior that is moral, that is ethical, and that is informed by a voice. And you know that voice, where it comes from? It comes from abazali bakho.
Yes, yes.
Because if, for example, ufundisiwe kowenu ukuba into ethile wrong,
Yes.
even if you were to leave your house, uhambe uyohlala erez, immediately uzokwenza laa nto irongo that abazali bakho taught you uba irongo.
Yes.
You'll always have laa nto ethi uba irongo le nto ndizoyenza because ufundisiwe.
Yes,
So once ube ngumntu ofundisiweyo, and ukufundiswa kwethu comes from ufundiswa by abazali bethu ekhaya, ufundiswa ngabazali bethu ekuhlaleni, because
yes.
in our African culture, umzali is not only your biological parent.
Yes.
Any person omdala kuwe ngumzali wakho.
Yes, this
That
is
is
what-
that is why even if uzodlala estratweni, once ubona umuntu omdala uqala uzole, because awufuni uba ngathi uzodlala phambi komuntu omdala umoshe. That is how we were brought up.
Yes, yes.
And that is why even that sentiment that defines how children are brought up in the African context, where they say it takes a village to raise a child, because the view is that umzali lona, if ungumzali ubona umntana, ngumntana akho lowo. And you know how that could help? We've got this problem now of children being raped. If you had abantu abadala that understood bangabantwana aba, they would never rape them.
Exactly.
Because uyazazi ukuba ngumzali, in the absence of the biological parent, you step in, and so you will never harm umntanakho. So that is what for me informs how is spirituality, a consciousness, and how then it makes it behavior yethu and our actions in our communities to be aligned ngendlela esifundiswe ngayo.
So we need to advocate for the return of abantu abamnyama back to their roots.
Definitely, back to their roots. And ingase siba encourage abantu abadala.
Yes.
Cela abantu abadala nisifundise, because umuntu omdala, remember thina sasikhula, I'm not sure if you'll know, kwaku abantu abadala in the evening babesibalisela intsomi.
Intsomi njalo.
Now, xa besibalisela intsomi, there's something educational they have kwezaa ntsomi as. Now, intsomi were not all generations or uzalo and all of these TV programs. Intsomi were coming from abazali bethu because they needed to teach us about where we come from, how we must conduct ourselves. Now you find that abazali have taken the responsibility of ukukhulisa abantwana to television. Abantwana ngoku
Abasafundiswa.
they are bafundiswa yi-TV, bafundiswa zi-podcast, not lena. Yabo?
Not this one.
Not this one. Zikhona i-podcast uxa ujonga uqomba, but what is the value here? Yabo? But lena, I've watched a few episodes. The value that umntana gets from watching Lenny podcast,
It's informative. Yes.
very informative.
Yeah. Honorable. Okay. Now, I want to touch on another statement by another scholar, an African scholar, Umamdani, in 1996. He states, I quote, colonialism did not just conquer lands. It displaced African way of knowing, governing and organizing society by imposing a Eurocentric ontology. Now, the question is, how can African political leaders reverse the damage of epistemic colonialism and recenter indigenous knowledge in national policy, given that you are also a part of a department that deals in matters of policy change and so forth?
People, maybe we just need to remind them, even though the people who settled in South Africa or the southern tip of the continent one would say they settled in 1652. There were others who tried ungena, and also in other countries.
Yes.
They tried ungena in those countries, they tried infiltrating those countries. And also what is true is that even if they may have came here in April 1652,
Yes.
they did not conquer us in 1652 April.
Yes.
It was a gradual process.
Yes, yes.
And in 1835, there's actually someone from the who was reporting to the British monarch or British Parliament,
Yes.
who said they've traveled the length and breadth of the continent, and they found that they've never seen abantu who are so moral, who are ethically grounded, who are very spiritual. And for them to actually conquer Africa, they need to uproot abantu abamnyama from spirituality sabo, from their moral underpinnings,
Yes.
from their ethical and cultural way of doing things. So that is what they managed to do, because you can never defeat umntu in their home ground. Ukubone xa kuthethwa home ground advantage.
Oh, exactly.
You'll never defeat a person edlala kwi home ground yakhe.
Umsusi.
Kufuneka umsusi, and that is what happened. So what needs to happen is that we need Tina as the people who are in parliament to actually up the ante in terms of driving the message of spirituality, the message of restoration.
Yes.
Because we can speak about land, we can speak about the economy, we can speak about imiteto, but
yes.
if the mind has not been restored
Yes.
to its original way in which it was created,
Exactly.
which is by Umdali, taking into account our taking into account Ubuntu as Africans,
Yes.
you'll find that we can never go far.
Exactly.
Hence, you find that if you want to defeat Umtu, colonize the mind. Once you are colonized mentally, even if you are free, you do not have chains that are holding you.
Yes.
But here you'll be held, ungakwazi no move. So that is why it becomes important to Kuba. Let's spread the message,
Yes.
each and every corner. That is why people were surprised one time. It was me and Honorable Kwankwa from the UDM.
Yes, yes.
We had a session in Parliament. I think it was the election of the speakers and so forth. We were asked to nominate. Before I nominated, ndaqala ndazitsho uba ndingudosini unoyilo umqorhana ndazithutha. I remember someone said on social media, uvuyo wenzani asikho sebhlanti apha kuseparlament, simply because in their minds when we go to these institutions of parliament kufuneka silibale uba singobani. We need to assimilate to the cultures of those institutions.
Yes.
Whereas ukuba thina we know who we are as Africans, sizongena in these institutions being proud of who we are, and at the same time sithethe ngamandla about the things that define who we are as abantu.
Yes. Now that we sesifike emaphethelweni, one last statement that resonates with what you just said. It's about Uchinwethu, who stated that African leadership is deeply spiritual in origin. It is based on cosmological balance, reverence for us ancestors, like what you have just explained, and harmony with nature. So he also states that elements completely absent in the Eurocentric model, which you also state, Doguti. Another fellow black African commented when you recited your clan names, because of, to him, that institution, it's Eurocentric, and it's proof that we still have a lot of work to do in terms of policy change and also changing our constitution so that it resonates with our Afrocentric way of life. So now the question, which is our last question, because of we have exhausted too much knowledge, I hope our knowers are very much informed by what our Honorable President has touched on. So now the question says, do you believe that the disconnection from African Indigenous spirituality has weakened African leadership? And what would a spiritually grounded leadership look like in practice?
Leadership, especially in the context of being spiritual,
Yes.
leadership, if ngayibeka ngesixhosa, is about intambiso.
Yes.
That is why you find in the olden days, ibisithi inkosi xa ithatha emveni kwenye inkosi, one of the first things funeka yenziwe is that funeka ithanjiswe, because xa uthanjiswa unikezwa amandla spiritually now.
Yes.
And xa unikezwa la mandla spiritually, then awusawuhambi wedwa, uhamba ngalamandla wanikeziweyo.
Exactly, yes.
That is why you find ukuba, if you were to read about Maqoma or King Ginsa, zonke zikumkani zethu, the level of wisdom abanayo, you can't say that it was coming from them.
Yes.
It is because spiritual leadership, njengoba ndisitsho, ihambelana nentambiso, and because ihambelana nentambiso, it means ubulumko of bonke abantu that were leaders before you.
Yes.
Bufika bukongamele wena. Therefore, when you deal with an issue, it is not your intellect, it is not your experience, but rather it is a combination of, yes, ukwazi kwakho, how you view things, but ngamandla, it is the wisdom that comes from le ntambiso uyiphetheyo okanye uyinikeziweyo. Even at emakhaya, uzoba nomfana apha, ozonikezwe responsibility ukuba makabe inhlabi yekhaya. Now that is a leadership role. It's not just into yodlala. You find that before ebe inhlabi, ebekwazi uhlaba nje ahlabe kungenzeki into, but immediately anikezwe la gunya, which is la ntambiso yokuhlaba, uthi xa implementa okanye execute duty yakhe, kube khona umahluko even spiritually, because akasahambi yedwa, uhamba nalamandla entambiso yakhe. So that is what we just need to understand leadership, ukuba it is not a question of experience. It is not a matter of your intellect, but in the African context, leadership is the anointment, because that anointment grants you the wisdom that is required to be able to fully execute your leadership responsibilities, not ngokwengcinga yakho or the way you want to lead people, but ngokwenvision yabakowenu abafuna ukuba ilizwe libheke phambili kangakanani na.
Sibonga kakhulu, Honorable. We'll close our session with one quote coming from Umazizi Kunene, who wrote a book about Ushaka as an imperialist, the great Ushaka. And what he stated in one of the quotes, he stated that Shaka complimented his spiritual guide, Maqoma, saying that he is the spiritual power of the nation. Through rituals, Maqoma was able to assist Ubukhosi Bukashaka Buphakame. And this is what you are saying about using now our spiritual guiders, our ancestors, as our guiding force to better lead the nations, so that we can be able to lead with integrity, lead with justice, and also in respect of abantu bethu. To close down manje our session, Dr. Uzilezwe Uchadebe as well advocates for inclusivity. He also advocates that Africans must unite under the banner of spirituality, because of it's their spiritual power. So for us to realize our power as Africans, all political leaders, Africans, from top structures to local structures, we need to lead in knowing that our power as Africans lies in our spirituality. So we thank you so much, Honorable President, and we thank you as African Hidden Voices. Our knowers, please do not forget to subscribe. Please do not forget to like and also support this groundbreaking bestseller book, which is Restoring Africa's Spiritual Identity. May we meet again. Thank you.